The morning of Sarah Mitchell's 45th birthday dawned crisp and clear in the suburban town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, the kind of autumn day that makes people believe in fresh starts and second chances. Sarah stood at her kitchen window, watching her neighbors rake leaves into perfect piles that their children would inevitably scatter before sunset, and allowed herself to feel something she hadn't experienced in 20 years. Genuine happiness. It had taken her 2 decades to reach this point. 2 decades to stop checking every dark-haired teenager on the street. 2 decades to stop jumping every time the phone rang. 2 decades to stop hoping that her younger sister Emma would walk through the front door with some impossible explanation for where she'd been since that terrible night in October 2004. Emma had been 13 years old when she vanished from their family home, disappearing sometime between midnight and dawn on a Tuesday that had started like any other. No signs of struggle, no ransom note, no witnesses. One day Emma was there, complaining about homework and arguing with Sarah about borrowing clothes, and the next day she was gone, leaving behind only questions that had haunted their family for 20 years. "Mom, you're doing that thing again," said 16-year-old Jake, Sarah's eldest son, as he wandered into the kitchen searching for breakfast. "That staring out the window thing you do every year around this time?" Sarah turned away from the window and smiled at her son, who had inherited his father's height and his mother's stubborn streak. "Just thinking about the party tonight. Are you sure you don't want to stay for dinner? Mom, watching you and Dad's friends talk about mortgage rates and property taxes isn't exactly my idea of a good time. Besides, Tyler's having people over, and his parents are actually cool about it." Sarah nodded, understanding. At 16, Jake was at that delicate age where family obligations felt like punishments, and she wasn't going to force him to celebrate a birthday that already carried too many complicated emotions. The truth was, Sarah had mixed feelings about celebrating her 45th birthday at all. For years after Emma's disappearance, birthdays had felt like markers of time passing without answers, annual reminders that life was moving forward while her sister remained frozen at 13 in their family's collective memory. But her husband, Michael, had insisted that this year would be different, that it was time to create new traditions and focus on the family they had built together rather than the family member they had lost. 20 people confirmed for tonight," Michael announced as he entered the kitchen, straightening his tie and grabbing his travel mug of coffee. "Your parents are driving down from Syracuse. My sister's bringing her kids, and most of the neighbors said they'd stop by." "Did you hear back from Detective Morrison?" Sarah asked, the question slipping out before she could stop herself. Michael paused in his morning routine, his expression shifting to the carefully neutral look he wore whenever Emma's case came up. "Sarah, we talked about this. Detective Morrison retired 3 years ago. The case is officially cold. It's time to—" "I know," Sarah said quickly. "I'm sorry, I know we agreed not to bring it up tonight. It's just 45 feels significant somehow, like a milestone." "It is significant," Michael said gently, crossing the kitchen to wrap his arms around his wife. "It's significant because you're here, you're healthy, you have 2 amazing kids and a husband who adores you. Emma's disappearance doesn't define your entire life, Sarah. It can't." Sarah leaned into his embrace, grateful for his steadiness, for the way he had helped her build a life worth living, despite the shadow that Emma's absence had cast over everything. Michael had been her college boyfriend when Emma disappeared, and he had stayed by her side through the initial investigation, the false leads, the private investigators her parents had hired, the gradual acceptance that Emma might never come home. "You're right," she said. "Tonight is about celebrating what we have, not mourning what we've lost." But even as she said the words, Sarah felt the familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach that always accompanied significant dates. Emma's birthday, the anniversary of her disappearance, family holidays, and now Sarah's own milestones. They all carried the weight of absence, the persistent question of where Emma was and whether she was still alive to mark these passages of time. After Michael left for work and Jake caught his ride to school, Sarah spent the morning preparing for the party. She had decided to host it at home rather than at a restaurant, partly because of cost, but mostly because she wanted to control the environment. The guest list was carefully curated to include only people who either didn't know about Emma or who were sensitive enough not to bring her up unprompted. Sarah was arranging flowers in the living room when her mother called, her voice carrying the forced cheerfulness that had become her default tone whenever family gatherings were discussed. "Honey, your father and I are leaving Syracuse in about an hour. We should be there by 3. Do you need us to stop anywhere on the way?" "No, Mom. I think we have everything covered. Just drive safely." "Sarah, I have to ask, are you sure you're okay with this party? I know birthdays can be difficult for you, especially the milestone ones." Sarah closed her eyes, understanding exactly what her mother meant without her having to say Emma's name. Her parents, Richard and Carol Patterson, had never fully recovered from Emma's disappearance either. They had stayed together, but their marriage had become a fragile thing, built around the shared trauma of losing a child and the careful avoidance of topics that might trigger the grief that lived just beneath the surface of their daily lives. "I'm fine, Mom. Really. Michael's right that it's time to focus on the present instead of the past. If you're sure. We're bringing that chocolate cake you used to love, the one from Shula's bakery." "Needed." After her mother hung up, Sarah found herself thinking about the chocolate cake from Shula's, how she and Emma used to split pieces that were too big for either of them to finish alone. Emma had always eaten the frosting first, saving the cake for last, a habit that had driven Sarah crazy when they were kids, but that she would give anything to witness again. The afternoon passed quickly as Sarah's house filled with decorations, catered food, and the controlled chaos of party preparation. Her 14-year-old daughter, Lily, helped arrange chairs and set up the music system, chattering about school drama and weekend plans with the easy confidence of a teenager who had never experienced real loss. "Mum, why don't we have any pictures of Aunt Emma around the house?" Lily asked as she folded napkins, the question coming out of nowhere with the directness that only teenagers possessed. Sarah paused in her arrangement of appetizer plates, caught off guard by the question she had been dreading for years. She and Michael had made a conscious decision not to display photographs of Emma prominently in their home, partly to avoid constant reminders of the loss, but mostly to protect their children from growing up in the shadow of a tragedy that had defined their parents' early adult years. "We have pictures, sweetie. They're in the photo albums upstairs. We wanted you and Jake to have your own space without feeling like you were competing with someone who wasn't here." "But she was your sister. Don't you miss her?" "Every day," Sarah admitted. "But missing someone and making your whole house a shrine to them are different things. Aunt Emma wouldn't want us to stop living our lives because she's not here to share them." Lily nodded thoughtfully, accepting the explanation with the resilience that had always amazed Sarah about her children. They had grown up knowing they had an aunt who had disappeared before they were born, but the knowledge was academic to them, a sad story from their parents' past, rather than a daily source of pain. By 6 o'clock, the house was ready. String lights created a warm glow in the backyard, tables groaned under the weight of food and drinks, and Sarah had changed into the navy blue dress that Michael had bought her for their anniversary. She looked in the bathroom mirror and saw a 45-year-old woman who had built a good life, despite experiencing unimaginable loss at 25. The first guests began arriving at 6:30. Neighbors from down the street, Michael's co-workers, Sarah's book club friends. The conversations were easy and familiar, touching on safe topics like work projects, children's achievements, and local politics. Sarah found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the party, laughing at her neighbor Tom's stories about his attempts at home renovation and listening to her friend Janet describe her daughter's college application process. Her parents arrived just before 7, looking older than their 71 years, but trying to project enthusiasm for the celebration. Her father, a retired accountant who had thrown himself into volunteer work after Emma's disappearance, carried a wrapped gift that Sarah knew would be something practical and thoughtful. Her mother, still beautiful despite the lines that grief had etched around her eyes, embraced Sarah with the fierce protectiveness that had characterized their relationship for the past 20 years. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," her mother said. "This is lovely. Emma would have—" She caught herself before finishing the sentence, a habit that had become second nature in their family. They all caught themselves before invoking Emma in casual conversation, before imagining how she would have looked or what she would have thought about their current lives. By 8 o'clock, the party was in full swing. Michael was manning the grill, filling the air with the smell of barbecued chicken and vegetables. Children from the neighborhood ran through the backyard, their laughter mixing with the adult conversations and the playlist of Sarah's favorite songs from the past 2 decades. For the first time in years, Sarah felt truly present at her own birthday celebration, genuinely enjoying the company of people who cared about her. It was 8:43 when everything changed. Sarah was in the kitchen, refilling the ice bucket, when she heard her mother's voice cut through the party noise with a sound that made everyone stop talking. It wasn't a scream exactly, but a sharp intake of breath, followed by a word that Sarah couldn't quite make out. She dropped the ice bucket and rushed toward the backyard, her heart already racing with the instinctive knowledge that something was terribly wrong. The party guests had formed a loose circle near the back gate, all of them staring at something or someone that Sarah couldn't see from her position on the deck. "Mom," Sarah called out, pushing through the crowd. "What's wrong?" That's when she saw her, standing just inside the back gate, wearing jeans and a dark green sweater that looked expensive but travel-worn, was a woman who appeared to be in her early 30s. Her dark hair was longer than Sarah remembered, styled in a way that suggested professional attention, and her face had lost the softness of adolescence. But the eyes were unmistakable, the same deep brown eyes that Sarah had looked into every day for the first 13 years of Emma's life. "Hi, Sarah," the woman said, her voice carrying traces of an accent that Sarah couldn't identify. "Happy birthday." The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved, no one spoke, no one seemed to breathe. The party lights continued to twinkle overhead. The music continued to play from the speakers, but the world had somehow stopped rotating on its axis. "Emma?" Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I know this is unexpected," the woman said, taking a tentative step forward. "I know you probably have questions, but I needed to see you. I needed to tell you that I'm okay, that I've been okay all these years." Sarah felt her legs give out beneath her. Michael caught her before she hit the ground, his strong hands supporting her weight as her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. This couldn't be Emma. Emma was 13 years old, frozen in time at the moment of her disappearance. Emma was missing persons reports and age progression photos and 20 years of unanswered questions. But the woman standing in her backyard had Emma's eyes, Emma's nose, the same small scar above her left eyebrow from when she had fallen off her bike at age 7. She was taller than Emma would have been, her face more angular, her posture more confident. But beneath the changes that 2 decades had wrought, Sarah could see the sister she had lost. "Where have you been?" Sarah's mother demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of joy and fury. "Where have you been for 20 years?" "I can explain everything," Emma said, "but maybe we should talk privately. I didn't mean to crash your party." "Crash my party?" Sarah found her voice, though it sounded strange and hollow to her own ears. "Emma, We thought you were dead. We've spent 20 years thinking you were dead. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The apology hung in the air like smoke, inadequate to bridge the chasm of 20 missing years. Sarah looked around at her party guests, all of whom were staring at the scene unfolding before them, with the fascination of people witnessing something that would become a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. "Everyone needs to leave," Sarah said suddenly, her voice gaining strength. "Right now, everyone needs to leave." "Sarah, honey, maybe we should call the police," suggested her neighbor Tom. "I mean, this could be anyone. How do you know this is really your sister?" "Because I know," Sarah snapped. "Because she's my sister and I know." But even as she said the words, doubt crept into her mind. This woman looked like Emma, sounded like Emma, knew details that only Emma would know. But 20 years was a long time. Long enough for someone to study family photos, to research personal details, to construct an elaborate deception for reasons that Sarah couldn't begin to fathom. "I have identification," Emma said, reaching into a small purse that Sarah hadn't noticed before. "I have a driver's license, a passport. I know you need proof." She handed Sarah a New York State driver's license with a current photo and the name Emma Catherine Patterson, Emma's full legal name. The address listed was in Manhattan, and the birth date was correct down to the month and day. "This could be fake," Michael said quietly, his voice steady but his hands shaking as he continued to support Sarah's weight. "Sarah, this could be an elaborate fraud. People have impersonated missing persons before." "I know what you're thinking," Emma said. "I know how impossible this must seem, but I can prove who I am. I can tell you things that only Emma would know." "Like what?" Sarah's father spoke for the first time since Emma's appearance, his voice carrying the controlled skepticism of a man who had spent 2 decades analyzing every possible lead in his daughter's case. "Like how Sarah used to read me stories every night before bed, but she always changed the endings because she thought the original ones were too sad. Like how we buried our hamster Mittens in the backyard under the apple tree and made a headstone out of a painted rock. Like how Sarah had a crush on Tommy Morrison in high school and used to practice writing her name as Sarah Morrison in her diary. Each detail hit Sarah like a physical blow. These weren't facts that could be researched or guessed. These were intimate family memories, the kind of shared experiences that bound siblings together across time and distance. "That could be enough for now," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "Everyone please leave. Please." "No." The party guests filed out reluctantly, shooting curious glances over their shoulders as they gathered their belongings and murmured subdued goodbyes. Tom and Janet lingered, clearly reluctant to leave Sarah alone with this woman who claimed to be her long-lost sister, but Michael gently but firmly ushered them toward the front door. Within 15 minutes, the backyard was empty, except for Sarah, Michael, their children, Sarah's parents, and the woman who said she was Emma. The party decorations looked foolish now, the abandoned food and drinks a stark reminder of how quickly celebration could transform into something else entirely. "I think we should go inside," Michael suggested. "If we're going to have this conversation, we should have it privately." They moved into the living room like sleepwalkers, arranging themselves in a loose circle with Emma sitting alone on one side and the rest of the family clustered protectively around Sarah. The children, sensing the gravity of the situation but not fully understanding it, perched on the edges of chairs and watched the adults with wide, curious eyes. "I need you to start from the beginning," Sarah said once everyone was settled. "I need you to tell me where you've been for 20 years and why you disappeared and why you're here now." Emma took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For the first time since she had appeared in the backyard, she looked nervous, vulnerable, younger than her 33 years. "It's complicated," she said. "It's going to sound impossible, and I know you're going to have questions that I can't answer completely, but I'll tell you everything I can. Did someone take you? Sarah's mother asked, her voice sharp with the fear that had haunted her for 2 decades. Did someone hurt you? No, Emma said quickly. No one took me. I left voluntarily. The words hit the room like a bomb. Sarah felt the air leave her lungs as the implications of what Emma had just said began to register. You left voluntarily? Sarah repeated. You were 13 years old. You were a child. I know how it sounds. I know how young 13 seems now, but at the time I felt like I didn't have a choice. I felt like staying would have been worse than leaving. Worse than what? Sarah's father demanded. What could have been worse than abandoning your family and letting us believe you were dead for 20 years? Emma's composure cracked slightly, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. I thought you would understand eventually. I thought you would realize that I was protecting you. Protecting us from what? From the truth about what I knew. From the truth about what I had seen. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. There was something in Emma's voice, a weight that suggested secrets far more complicated than a teenager running away from home. What did you see, Emma? Sarah asked quietly. Emma looked around the room, her gaze settling on Jake and Lily before moving back to Sarah. Maybe the children should go upstairs, she said. This isn't something they need to hear. No, Sarah said firmly. These are my children. This is my family. If you have something to say, you can say it in front of all of us. Emma nodded slowly, accepting the boundary that Sarah had drawn. She was quiet for a long moment, gathering her thoughts, or perhaps her courage. The night I disappeared, she said finally, I saw something that I wasn't supposed to see, something that made me realize that our family wasn't what I thought it was, that the people I trusted most in the world were capable of things I couldn't understand or forgive. What kind of things? Michael asked. Emma's eyes moved to Sarah's parents, who had gone very still in their chairs. I saw Mom and Dad with someone they shouldn't have been with. I heard conversations about money and threats and making problems disappear. I realized that the reason we lived so comfortably, the reason Dad could afford to send us to private school and take those vacations to Europe, wasn't because he was a successful accountant. Sarah's father stood up abruptly, his face flushing red. That's enough. I don't know who you are or what kind of sick game you're playing, but I won't sit here and listen to you spread lies about our family. Dad, sit down, Sarah said, her voice carrying an authority that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. Let her finish. Sarah, you can't possibly believe... I said sit down. Richard Patterson sat down slowly, his hands shaking with what could have been anger or fear or both. What exactly did you see that night? Sarah asked, her voice steady, despite the fact that her entire world was shifting beneath her feet. I saw Dad meeting with a man named Vincent Carbone in our garage at 2 in the morning. I heard them talking about a witness who needed to be silenced, about money that needed to be moved, about making sure certain information never reached the FBI. The name Vincent Carbone hit Sarah like a slap. She remembered reading about him in the newspaper years later, a minor organized crime figure who had been arrested for racketeering and money laundering. The idea that her father, her quiet, mild-mannered accountant father, could have been involved with someone like that seemed impossible. That's ridiculous, her mother said, but her voice lacked conviction. Richard, tell her how ridiculous that is. Sarah looked at her father, waiting for the denial that would make sense of everything, that would prove this woman was an imposter, spinning elaborate lies for reasons that Sarah couldn't fathom. But the denial didn't come. Instead, Richard Patterson buried his face in his hands and began to cry. The silence that followed Richard Patterson's breakdown stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Sarah watched her father cry into his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and broken inside him, and felt the last vestiges of her childhood illusions crumble into dust. "Dad," she said quietly, her voice carrying a strange mixture of compassion and demand. "Look at me." Richard raised his head slowly, his eyes red and swollen, looking older than his 71 years. The man who had taught Sarah to ride a bicycle, who had helped her with algebra homework, who had walked her down the aisle at her wedding, suddenly looked like a stranger. "Is it true?" Sarah asked. "What Emma is saying about Vincent Carbone, about illegal money, is it true?" "Sarah," her mother interjected, her voice sharp with panic, "don't listen to this. Your father is a good man. He's worked hard his entire life to provide for our family." "Mom, I need to hear this from Dad." Sarah's voice was steady, but Emma could see her hands trembling as she gripped the arms of her chair. "Dad, I need you to tell me the truth." Richard Patterson looked around the room, his gaze moving from his wife to his older daughter to his grandchildren, and finally settling on the woman who claimed to be Emma. For a moment, Emma thought he might deny everything, might find some way to explain away what she had witnessed 20 years ago. Instead, he said, "It started small." The words hung in the air like an admission of guilt that couldn't be taken back. "Richard, don't," Carol pleaded. "Think about what you're saying." "I've been thinking about it for 20 years, he replied, his voice hollow. "Every day since Emma disappeared, I've been thinking about it." Emma leaned forward in her chair, her heart racing. For 2 decades, she had carried the burden of what she had seen that night, the knowledge that had driven her from her family and into a life she had never planned. Now, finally, someone else was going to share that burden. "Tell us," Sarah said simply. Richard took a shaky breath and began to speak, his voice growing stronger as the words came out, as if confession itself was providing some form of relief. "In 1995, I was doing taxes for several small businesses in the area. One of them was a restaurant called Nino's, owned by a man named Tony Marchetti. Tony was having trouble with the IRS, some discrepancies in his books that could have cost him everything. I helped him restructure his finances. I showed him how to move money through different accounts, how to make certain transactions look legitimate. That's not illegal, Michael said. Tax planning is part of what accountants do. It became illegal when Tony introduced me to his business partners, Richard continued. Men like Vincent Carbone, who needed financial services that traditional accountants wouldn't provide. They needed someone who could clean money, hide assets, create paper trails that would satisfy federal investigators. Emma watched Sarah's face as the implications of their father's words began to register. The comfortable suburban life they had all taken for granted, the private schools, the family vacations, the house in the good neighborhood, all of it had been built on a foundation of criminal money. "How much money?" Sarah asked. "Over the years, millions. I took a percentage of everything I cleaned for them, 5%, sometimes 10% depending on the complexity of the transaction." "Jesus Christ, Dad." Sarah stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "How long did this go on?" "From 1995 until," Richard's voice trailed off. "Until the night I disappeared," Emma finished for him. All eyes turned back to Emma, who had been silent during her father's confession. She looked different now than she had when she first appeared in the backyard. The confident woman who had walked through the gate had been replaced by someone younger, more vulnerable, as if revisiting these memories was stripping away the layers of protection she had built around herself. "Tell us exactly what happened that night," Sarah said. "Everything you saw, everything you heard." Emma closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering the strength to revisit a memory she had tried to bury for 20 years. "I couldn't sleep," she began. I had been having nightmares for weeks, these weird dreams about men in suits coming to the house. I got up around 1:30 to get some water, and I saw lights in the garage through the kitchen window. She paused, opening her eyes and looking directly at her father. I thought maybe Dad was working on something, so I went out through the side door to see if he needed help. That's when I heard voices. Dad was talking to two men I didn't recognize. One of them was Vincent Carbone, though I didn't know his name at the time. How do you know it was Vincent Carbone? Michael asked. Because I spent years researching him after I left, Emma replied. I needed to understand what I had stumbled into that night. Richard let out a bitter laugh. You were always too smart for your own good, Emma, too curious. What exactly did you hear them discussing? Sarah pressed. Emma's voice dropped to almost a whisper. They were talking about a federal investigation. Someone named Detective Marcus Webb had been asking questions about Tony Marchetti's restaurant, tracing financial records. Vincent was angry, saying that Webb was getting too close to their operation. The name Marcus Webb sent a chill through Sarah's memory. She remembered reading about him in the newspaper years later, a federal investigator who had been killed in what was ruled a car accident, but which many people suspected was something more sinister. They were planning to kill him, Emma continued. Vincent was explaining how they were going to make it look like an accident, how they were going to use Dad's knowledge of Webb's financial situation to make it appear that he had been taking bribes and decided to flee rather than face prosecution. That's not true, Richard said quickly. I never agreed to help them hurt anyone. I was just supposed to create some false financial records that would discredit Webb if he got too close. But you knew what they were planning, Emma said. You knew they were going to kill him, and you didn't try to stop them. I was terrified, Richard admitted. These weren't people you said no to, Emma. If I had refused to help them, they would have killed our entire family. Emma shook her head. That's what you told yourself to justify it. But I was 13 years old, Dad, and even I could see that there were other options. You could have gone to the FBI. You could have moved us somewhere safe. You chose to help them because it was easier than doing the right thing. Sarah felt sick to her stomach. The father she had idolized her entire life, the man she had trusted to protect their family, had been willing to participate in murder to protect his criminal activities. What happened next? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. I heard enough, Emma said. I heard them planning Webb's murder. Heard Dad agreeing to help cover it up, heard Vincent talking about other people who might need to be handled if they became problems. I realized that our family was in the middle of something terrible, and that the people I trusted most in the world were not who I thought they were. So you ran away, Michael said. A 13-year-old girl decided to disappear rather than confront her parents about what she had witnessed. I didn't just run away, Emma corrected. I went to the FBI. The statement landed like a bomb in the quiet living room. Sarah felt her knees give out, and she sank back into her chair, staring at Emma with a mixture of admiration and horror. You went to the FBI when you were 13, Sarah asked. I walked into the federal building in downtown Syracuse the next morning and told them everything I had heard. I told them about Vincent Carbone, about the plan to kill Detective Webb, about Dad's involvement in money laundering. Jesus, Emma, Richard breathed. Do you have any idea what you did to us? I saved your life, Emma replied sharply. All of your lives. Because when I gave the FBI that information, they were able to prevent Webb's murder and arrest Vincent Carbone before he could retaliate against our family. Sarah's mind was racing, trying to process the implications of what Emma was telling them. But if you went to the FBI, why did you disappear? Why didn't you come home? Because the FBI told me I couldn't, Emma said simply. Agent Sarah Morrison. Yes, she had the same first name as you, which I always thought was funny. Explained that testifying against Vincent Carbone would put me and our entire family in danger. The only way to keep everyone safe was for me to disappear. Witness protection, Michael said, understanding dawning in his voice. Witness protection, Emma confirmed. Agent Morrison arranged for me to be placed with a foster family in Oregon under a new identity. Emma Patterson died that night in October 2004, and a girl named Rebecca Walsh was born. Sarah felt like she was drowning in revelations that kept getting more impossible. You've been in witness protection for 20 years. For 20 years I've been Rebecca Walsh. I went to high school in Portland, got a degree in computer science from Oregon State, worked for various tech companies in Seattle and San Francisco. I built an entire life under a name that wasn't mine, with a family history that was completely fabricated. But you're here now, Sarah pointed out. Why are you here now if you're supposed to be in witness protection? Emma's expression darkened. Because Vincent Carbone died in federal prison 3 months ago. His organization was dismantled years ago. The threat that forced me into hiding is gone. So you're free to come home, Carol said, speaking for the first time since Richard's confession. You can be Emma again. Can I? Emma asked, her voice carrying a bitterness that 20 years of separation had created. Can I really just walk back into a family that believed I was dead for 2 decades? Can I become the sister of someone who built her entire adult life around the trauma of my disappearance? Sarah flinched at the harsh truth in Emma's words. Her entire identity for the past 20 years had been shaped by being the sister of a missing girl. Her marriage to Michael, her decision to have children, her choice of career as a social worker specializing in missing persons cases, all of it had been influenced by Emma's absence. That's not fair, Sarah said. We grieved for you. We never stopped looking for you. You grieved for a 13-year-old girl who was already gone, Emma replied. I'm 33 years old now, Sarah. I'm a stranger to you. I have 20 years of experiences, relationships, successes and failures that you know nothing about. The Emma you remember doesn't exist anymore. Then why are you here? Sarah demanded. If we're all strangers to you, if coming home is impossible, why did you show up at my birthday party? Emma was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was softer, more vulnerable than it had been all evening. Because 3 months ago, when Agent Morrison called to tell me that Vincent Carbone was dead, and I was free to reclaim my original identity if I wanted to, the first thing I thought about wasn't the relief of being able to stop hiding. It was regret. Regret about what? Regret that I had missed 20 years of your life. Regret that I didn't know my nephews and nieces, didn't know what kind of woman you had become, didn't know if you were happy or successful or loved. Regret that I had protected you by leaving, but had hurt you in ways I never intended. Tears were flowing freely down Emma's cheeks now, the composed facade she had maintained finally cracking completely. I spent weeks researching your life online before I came here tonight. I know you're a social worker who specializes in missing persons cases. I know you have 2 beautiful children and a husband who clearly adores you. I know you've built a good life despite what I put you through. But I also know that you've never stopped looking for me, never stopped hoping I would come home. Of course I never stopped hoping, Sarah said, her own tears starting to fall. You were my little sister. You were my responsibility. You were 25 years old when I disappeared, Sarah. I was never your responsibility. Yes, you were, Sarah said fiercely. After Mom and Dad's divorce, after all the chaos in our house, I was the one who made sure you got to school on time, made sure you had lunch money, helped you with your homework. I was more than your sister. I was your guardian. Emma looked confused. Mom and Dad's divorce? What are you talking about? Sarah froze, realizing she had just revealed something that Emma didn't know, something that had happened after her disappearance. They divorced about 5 years after you vanished, Sarah explained reluctantly. The stress of losing you, the guilt and blame, The financial problems after Dad lost his accounting license. It destroyed their marriage. Emma turned to look at her parents, who had been sitting in silence during her exchange with Sarah. Carol was staring at her hands, while Richard looked like he had aged a decade in the past hour. "You got divorced?" Emma asked. "The FBI investigation that followed your disappearance uncovered Dad's money laundering activities," Carol explained, her voice hollow. "He was arrested, charged with multiple federal crimes. He served 3 years in federal prison." "I lost everything," Richard added. "My accounting license, my business, our house. The government seized all our assets as proceeds of criminal activity. After I got out of prison, Carol couldn't forgive me for what I had done to our family." Emma stared at her parents in shock. "I didn't know. Agent Morrison never told me about any of that." "Because it wasn't your fault," Sarah said quickly. "None of it was your fault, Emma. Dad made his choices long before that night. You just had the courage to do something about it. But if I had stayed, if I had found another way to handle what I had learned—" "Dad would probably be dead," Michael interjected. "From what you've described, Vincent Carbone and his associates weren't the kind of people who left loose ends alive. If you had confronted your parents directly, if you had tried to convince them to go to the authorities themselves, you all might have ended up dead." Emma looked around the room at her family, a family that had been torn apart by secrets and crimes and 20 years of separation. The comfortable suburban life that had seemed so perfect when she was 13 had been built on a foundation of lies, and her decision to expose those lies had set off a chain reaction that had destroyed everything. "I need to know something," Sarah said suddenly. "During all these years, during all the birthdays and holidays and family milestones you missed, did you ever think about coming back? Did you ever think about letting us know you were alive?" "Every day," Emma admitted, "especially in the beginning. There were nights when I almost called, times when I wrote letters that I never sent. But Agent Morrison was very clear about the rules. Any contact with my original family could compromise the investigation and put everyone at risk." "What about after the investigation was over? After Dad was convicted and sentenced?" "By then, years had passed. I was in college, building a life as Rebecca Walsh. The FBI psychologist assigned to my case explained that returning to my original identity after so much time might be more traumatic than beneficial. She suggested that it might be better for everyone if Emma Patterson remained dead." "But you didn't agree with that," Michael observed. "I was 18 years old and terrified," Emma replied. "I had been living under a false identity for 5 years, and the idea of suddenly becoming Emma again, of trying to rebuild relationships with people who had grieved for me, seemed impossible. So I chose to stay Rebecca Walsh." "Until now," Sarah said. "Until now." The room fell silent again as everyone absorbed the weight of Emma's story. 20 years of separation, of missed birthdays and holidays, of important milestones and daily moments that could never be recovered. 20 years of a family torn apart by criminal activities and the courage of a 13-year-old girl who had been willing to sacrifice everything to protect people she loved. "What happens now?" Carol asked, speaking the question that everyone was thinking. "I don't know," Emma admitted. "I came here tonight because I needed to see you, needed to explain what happened and why I left. But I honestly don't know what comes next." "You could stay," Sarah said quietly. "You could move back to the area, become part of our lives again. You could be Aunt Emma to Jake and Lily, could be my sister again." "Could I really? After everything that's happened, after all the damage that's been done?" "We could try," Sarah offered. "It wouldn't be easy and it wouldn't be the same as if you had never left, but we could try to build something new." Emma looked around the room one more time, studying the faces of family members who were familiar but strange, people she loved but barely knew. "I'd like that," she said finally. "I'd like to try." But even as she spoke the words, Sarah could see something in Emma's eyes that suggested the story wasn't over, that there were still secrets waiting to be revealed. And in the back of her mind, a question was forming that would keep her awake for many nights to come. If Emma had been in witness protection for 20 years, if she had been Rebecca Walsh with a completely different life and identity, how had she known that tonight was Sarah's 45th birthday party? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that everyone could smell but no one could see. Sarah stared at Emma, studying her sister's face for any sign of deception, any flicker of recognition that she had been caught in an inconsistency that could unravel everything she had told them. "How did you know about the party?" Sarah asked again, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly. "If you've been Rebecca Walsh for 20 years, if you've had no contact with our family, how did you know that tonight was my 45th birthday party?" Emma's composure wavered for just a moment, a barely perceptible pause that might have been imperceptible to anyone who hadn't known her as a child. But Sarah had spent 13 years learning to read Emma's tells, the small gestures and expressions that revealed when her little sister was hiding something. "I told you," Emma said, her voice just a fraction too careful. "I researched your life online before coming here, social media posts, public records, things like that." "What social media posts?" Michael asked, his detective instincts finally kicking in after an evening of emotional revelations. Sarah barely uses social media, and she certainly didn't post anything about tonight's party. "Facebook," Emma said quickly. "There was a Facebook post about the party." I don't have Facebook," Sarah said flatly. "I deleted my account 2 years ago because I got tired of seeing missing persons posts that reminded me of you." Emma's face went pale, and for the first time since she had appeared in the backyard, she looked genuinely frightened. Sarah felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach, the knowledge that they were about to discover something that would change everything they thought they knew about Emma's return. "Emma," Sarah said quietly, "I need you to tell me the truth. How did you know about the party?" Emma started, then stopped, looking around the room at faces that had gone from welcoming to suspicious in the span of a few minutes. "It's complicated. More complicated than being in witness protection for 20 years?" Sarah asked. "More complicated than our father being a money launderer for the mob. I think we've established that we can handle complicated." Emma stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back, her confident demeanor completely gone. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been watching you for months." The admission hit the room like a physical blow. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat as the implications of what Emma had just said began to register. "Watching me?" Sarah repeated. "What do you mean, watching me?" "I moved back to the East Coast 6 months ago," Emma said, still pacing, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "I took a job with a tech company in New York, but I rented an apartment here in Millbrook. I've been observing your life from a distance." "Jesus Christ, Emma," Michael said, standing up and moving protectively closer to Sarah. "You've been stalking us?" "Not stalking," Emma said quickly. "I would never hurt you or your family. I just needed to understand what kind of life you had built, whether you were happy, whether there was room for me in your world." "So you've been spying on us for 6 months," Sarah said, her voice growing harder. "Watching our house, following us around town, learning our routines. I know how it sounds, but I had to be careful. I couldn't just show up without knowing what I was walking into. What if you had remarried? What if you had moved away? What if you didn't want to see me? So you decided to find out by stalking us instead of just calling." Sarah's voice was rising now, 20 years of grief and confusion and anger finally finding a target. "Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? To know that while I was mourning you, while I was searching for you, You were hiding in our own town, watching us like we were characters in a TV show?" Emma stopped pacing and turned to face Sarah, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I know it was wrong. I know it was a violation of your privacy. But I was terrified, Sarah. I'd spent 20 years building a life as someone else, and the idea of suddenly becoming Emma again, of trying to fit back into a family that had moved on without me, was overwhelming." "What else have you been doing for the past 6 months?" Michael asked, his voice cold with suspicion. "What else haven't you told us?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was so low that everyone had to strain to hear her. "I broke into the house 3 times. Sarah felt the room spin around her. "You what?" "When you were at work and the kids were at school and Michael was traveling, I knew your routines. I knew when the house would be empty. I just wanted to see how you lived, to understand who you had become." "Oh my God," Carol breathed, speaking for the first time in several minutes. "Emma, what have you become?" "I didn't take anything," Emma said desperately. "I didn't hurt anything. I looked at your photo albums, read some of your mail, tried to piece together the life you had built without me." Sarah stood up so abruptly that her chair fell over backward. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot, and everyone jumped. "Get out," Sarah said, her voice deadly quiet. "Sarah, please let me explain." "Get out!" Sarah screamed, 20 years of suppressed emotion finally exploding. "Get out of my house. Get out of my life. I don't care if you're Emma or Rebecca or whoever the hell you think you are. I want you gone." "Sarah, honey, maybe we should—" "No, Michael." Sarah whirled on her husband, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare try to calm me down. This woman, whoever she is, has been stalking our family for 6 months. She's been breaking into our house, violating our privacy, watching our children. I don't care what sob story she has about witness protection. I want her gone." Emma backed toward the door, her face crumpling with despair. "Sarah, I know you're angry, but please don't make me leave without letting me explain everything. There's more you need to know." "More?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "More lies, more manipulation. What could you possibly have to say that would make any of this okay?" "I'm dying." The words stopped Sarah cold. Emma stood by the door, tears streaming down her face, her hands shaking as she reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder. "I have stage 4 pancreatic cancer," Emma said, her voice breaking. "I was diagnosed 4 months ago. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months left, 8 if I'm lucky." She held out the folder with medical records, test results, doctors' reports that would confirm what she was saying. Sarah stared at the folder, as if it were a snake that might bite her. "That's why I came back," Emma continued. "Not because Vincent Carbone died, not because I was finally free from witness protection. I came back because I'm dying, and I couldn't die without seeing you again, without trying to explain what happened, without telling you how sorry I am for all the pain I caused." Sarah sank back into her chair, the anger draining out of her as quickly as it had come. "You're lying. This is just another manipulation." "Look at the medical records," Emma pleaded. "Call the oncologist at Mount Sinai, whose name is on the letterhead. I'm not lying about this, Sarah. I wish I were." Michael took the folder from Emma's hands and quickly scanned the documents inside. His expression grew more somber with each page he read. "They're real," he said quietly. "These medical records are legitimate. Stage 4 adenocarcinoma of the pancreas, diagnosed 4 months ago at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Emma's quiet sobbing. Sarah stared at her sister, this woman who had been dead to her for 20 years, who had been watching her family from the shadows, who was now dying of cancer, and felt her entire world rearranging itself yet again. "Why didn't you tell us this from the beginning?" Sarah asked. "Because I didn't want your pity," Emma replied. "I didn't want you to forgive me just because I'm dying. I wanted you to forgive me because you understood why I made the choices I made. But you've been lying to us all night, Sarah pointed out, about how you found out about the party, about watching us. How do I know you're not lying about the cancer too? Because what would be the point? Emma asked. What would I gain by lying about having terminal cancer? I came here tonight knowing that I might be rejected, knowing that you might not want me in your life. I was prepared for that, but I couldn't die without trying. Sarah looked around the room at her family. Her parents sat frozen in their chairs, looking older and more fragile than she had ever seen them. Michael held the medical records in his hands, like evidence of a crime he wished hadn't been committed. Jake and Lily watched the adults with the wide-eyed fascination of children witnessing drama they didn't fully understand. I need some air, Sarah said suddenly, walking toward the back door. I need to think. She stepped out into the backyard, where her birthday party had been in full swing just a few hours earlier. The decorations still hung from the trees, looking foolish now in the darkness. Empty plates and glasses littered the tables, abandoned when her guests had been asked to leave so abruptly. Emma followed her outside, maintaining a careful distance. I know you hate me right now, Emma said softly. I know that learning about the surveillance, the break-ins, makes everything I told you about protecting the family seem hypocritical. It does, Sarah agreed. It makes you seem like a stranger who's been studying us like lab rats. Maybe that's what I became. Maybe 20 years of hiding, 20 years of being someone else, 20 years of wondering what happened to the people I left behind. Maybe it broke something in me that can't be fixed. Sarah turned to look at her sister, really look at her for the first time since she had appeared at the party. In the moonlight, she could see that Emma was thinner than she had appeared in the living room, that there were shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and pain medication. Are you really dying? Sarah asked. Yes. How long do you really have? The doctors say 6 months if I continue treatment, maybe 3 if I don't. The treatment makes me sick, makes it hard to think clearly, makes me feel like I'm dying by degrees instead of all at once. Sarah felt tears starting to fall again, but these were different from the angry tears she had shed inside. These were tears of grief for a sister she had lost twice, once to witness protection and now to cancer. I don't know how to forgive you for watching us, Sarah said. I don't know how to get past the feeling that you've been treating us like a research project instead of family. I don't expect you to forgive me for that, Emma replied. I know it was wrong. I know it was a violation. But I hope you can understand why I felt like I needed to know who you had become before I revealed myself. You could have hired a private investigator. You could have asked the FBI to make contact. You could have sent a letter. I could have done a lot of things differently, but I was scared, Sarah. I was a 33-year-old woman who had never learned how to be part of a family because I left mine when I was 13. I didn't know how to just show up and say, "Hi, I'm not dead after all." Sarah wiped her eyes and looked up at the stars that were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. When they were children, she and Emma used to lie on their backs in this same yard and make up stories about the constellations. Emma had always been the more imaginative one, creating elaborate myths about warrior princesses and magical kingdoms. What do you want from us now? Sarah asked. What's your ideal outcome from tonight? I want to know you, Emma said simply. I want to know who my sister became, what kind of mother you are, what makes you laugh, what keeps you awake at night. I want to meet my nephews and nieces properly, not just watch them from a distance. I want to tell you about Rebecca Walsh's life, about the college I went to and the job I love, and the friends I've made and the man I almost married. You almost got married? His name was David. He was a software engineer in Seattle. We were together for 3 years, lived together for 2. He wanted to marry me, but I couldn't because I couldn't tell him who I really was. Rebecca Walsh's entire history was fabricated by the FBI. I couldn't build a real relationship on a foundation of lies. So you broke up with him? I told him I wasn't ready for marriage and moved to San Francisco for a new job. He was heartbroken, confused. He deserved better than that, but I didn't know how to give it to him without risking everything. Sarah tried to imagine what it would be like to live an entire adult life under a false identity, unable to form genuine relationships because every conversation required careful editing to avoid revealing the truth. That sounds incredibly lonely, Sarah said. It was. For 20 years I've been alone in a way that most people can't understand. I had friends, colleagues, romantic relationships, but I could never be completely honest with any of them. There was always a part of me that had to remain hidden. And now I'm dying, and Vincent Carbone is dead, and the only people in the world who know my real story are in that house behind us. For the first time in 20 years, I can be completely honest about who I am and where I came from. Sarah turned to face Emma fully, studying her sister's face in the dim light from the house. Despite the years and the changes and the horrible circumstances of their reunion, she could still see traces of the 13-year-old girl she had lost 20 years ago. "If I let you back into our lives," Sarah said slowly, "if I try to forgive you for watching us and breaking into our house, what happens when you die? What happens to my children when they get attached to an aunt they just met and then lose her 3 months later?" "I don't know," Emma admitted. "I can't promise that letting me into your lives won't cause more pain down the road, but I can promise that if you give me a chance, I'll be completely honest with you from now on. No more lies, no more surveillance, no more secrets." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, weighing the potential for future heartbreak against the opportunity to know her sister again, even briefly. "I have conditions," she said finally. "Anything. First, you move into a hotel tonight. I'm not comfortable with you having an apartment here in town where you've been watching us. If you want to be part of our lives, it has to be open and honest, not secretive." "Okay." "Second, you tell Jake and Lily everything. Age-appropriate versions, but they need to understand who you are and why you disappeared and why you're back. I won't have any more secrets in my family." "I understand." "Third, you get counseling. I don't care if you're dying, you need professional help to deal with 20 years of isolation and whatever psychological damage made you think stalking us was acceptable behavior." Emma nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Sarah warned. "This is going to be hard. There are going to be days when I'm angry at you. Days when I resent you for putting us through this. Days when I wish you had stayed dead instead of coming back to break our hearts all over again. I know. And when you die, when the cancer wins, I'm going to be furious at you for making me love you again just to lose you." "I know that too." Sarah wiped her eyes and looked back toward the house where the rest of their family was waiting. "Come on," she said. "Let's go inside and figure out how to tell my children that their dead aunt isn't dead after all, but she's dying anyway." They walked back into the house together, two sisters who had been separated by 20 years of secrets and lies and impossible choices. The family that waited for them inside was broken in ways that might never be fully repaired, but it was still a family. And for however much time they had left together, they would try to heal what could be healed and accept what couldn't be changed. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the same backyard where Emma had appeared on her birthday, but this time she was wearing black and holding a funeral program with Emma's picture on the front. The cancer had moved faster than anyone had expected, taking Emma just as she and Sarah were beginning to rebuild their relationship. The funeral was small, just family and a few close friends. along with Agent Morrison, who had flown in from Washington to pay her respects to the brave 13-year-old girl who had risked everything to protect her family. Emma had been buried under her real name, Emma Catherine Patterson, with a headstone that read, "Beloved daughter and sister who chose courage over comfort." In her final weeks, Emma had shared stories about Rebecca Walsh's life, helping Sarah understand the woman her sister had become during their 20 years apart. She had been brilliant and successful and deeply lonely, a person who had sacrificed her own happiness to protect people she loved. She had died knowing that she was forgiven, that she was loved, and that her story would be remembered. "Are you okay?" Michael asked, putting his arm around Sarah's shoulders as the last of the funeral guests departed. "I will be," Sarah replied, looking at the place where Emma had first reappeared in their lives. "I'm sad that we only got 3 months together, but I'm grateful we got those 3 months at all." Jake and Lily had taken Emma's death hard, but they had also been amazed by her story, by the courage she had shown as a teenager and the sacrifice she had made for her family. In her final weeks, Emma had told them stories about their mother as a child, shared memories that Sarah had thought were lost forever. "Do you think she was happy in the end?" Lily asked, joining her parents in the backyard. Sarah thought about Emma's final days, about the peace that had seemed to settle over her once all the secrets were finally revealed, once she was able to be Emma Patterson again instead of Rebecca Walsh. "Yes," Sarah said. "I think she was finally happy to be home." As the sun set over Millbrook, Pennsylvania, Sarah reflected on the strange gift that Emma's return had given their family. It hadn't been the reunion she had dreamed of for 20 years, and it had ended far too quickly. But it had been real, honest, and ultimately healing. Emma Patterson had disappeared at 13 to protect her family from the consequences of her father's crimes. She'd returned at 33 to make peace with the choices she had made and to die surrounded by people who loved her. In between, she had lived an entire life under someone else's name, but in the end, she had come home to be herself. The party decorations from Sarah's birthday had long since been taken down, but the memory of that night would stay with their family forever. The night Emma came back from the dead to say goodbye.